Hello everyone. Welcome back to the Narratives channel. In the previous chapter, we followed Tommy on an exciting space espionage adventure, and we hope you enjoyed this thrilling story. Now, get ready to embark on a new challenge alongside Tommy and his friends. We're confident that you'll have a lot of fun on this new journey. So, let's get started. Days after his last adventure, Tommy was sitting at the dinner table while his mother served a delicious steak with mashed potatoes accompanied by peas and other vegetables. The food seemed even tastier with the hunger he had after a day at school. In the background, the still black and white tube television was on, displaying an interview with NASA engineer Mary Jackson. She explained the difficult task of being a black woman at the time and how men were still privileged in the field of science and technology. Tommy's mother commented on how inspiring Mary Jackson was, while his father was sitting at the table wearing a white tank top stained with sweat, as he hadn't taken his shower yet. The tablecloth was white, worn out, and had small food stains that didn't come out after washing. While the family was having dinner, Sneezes, the lazy house cat, was peacefully sleeping on the arm of a scratched armchair, leaving evident marks from its sharp claws. On the other hand, Tommy's little sister, Liz, was sitting in her high chair, excited about the food her mother had prepared and making a mess as she delighted in each piece. With each spoonful, a new culinary adventure for Liz, who seemed to be having a lot of fun with the colors, textures, and flavors. Meanwhile, Tommy was paying attention to the interview and the inspiring words of Mary Jackson. Even more motivated, he was thinking about a new imaginary adventure, this time to reach Mars. His eyes shone with excitement, and he knew that his imagination would take him far. After all, as Mary Jackson said, nothing is impossible when you have the will and determination. Tommy finished his dinner and sat in front of the TV to watch the engineer's interview. As the interview continued, her words began to echo in his mind. Mary Jackson said that if men continued to separate great minds by gender, men would not reach the moon or Mars. For Tommy, this meant that he needed to keep dreaming of space adventures and believe that he could one day achieve this goal. In his imagination, Tommy already saw himself having breakfast the next morning, reading the news in a newspaper delivered to his door. His mother was making waffles as he got ready for another day at NASA. The agency driver arrived to pick him up, and Ian was already in the car with Lucy to take them to work. Tommy noticed that in his imagination, he was even taller than in reality. As Tommy's mother handed him a lunch for the day, consisting of a sandwich and a jug of coffee, she wished him a good day at work at NASA. Tommy felt a wave of excitement as he prepared for another day full of adventures and challenges. As he got into the car, he noticed that Lucy was radiant and perfumed, which made his heart beat even faster in his chest. He became a little awkward, not knowing what to do with his hands, whether to put them in his pockets or cross his arms, stuttering a smile. As the car drove towards NASA, Tommy grabbed his sketch pad and started jotting down some ideas for a possible mission to Mars. He imagined the difficulties people would face in living there and the solutions that could be found. He thought about how they could produce food in a hostile environment, how they could generate energy, how they could protect themselves from sandstorms, and much more. Ian opened a report of the last mission and didn't know what their destiny would be. Tommy was anxious to find out what the next mission would be and prepare for another space adventure. As the car continued to move down the road, carrying Tommy, Ian, and Lucy towards NASA, the sun was starting to appear on the horizon, lighting up the sky with an orange hue. Tommy felt the excitement growing inside of him, knowing that he was about to embark on an epic adventure that would change his life and the lives of millions of people around the world. Finally, they arrived at NASA's parking lot, and when the driver parked the vehicle, the ground began to descend like an elevator. Tommy and his friends were surprised to realize they were heading to hidden floors underground. The parking lot lights quickly became small at the top, while the car descended through a reinforced concrete tunnel. They passed through several areas and sectors of various NASA activities, and the lights reflected on the driver's head, who had a shiny bald head in a black suit and sunglasses. The rays of light, accompanied by a slightly greenish background, passed as if it were a TV out of tune, and they felt like they were in a science fiction movie. With each floor they descended, Tommy became more fascinated by what he saw through the car window. After about 5 minutes, the car finally arrived at the floor where they were supposed to exit. Tommy and his friends got out of the car feeling a bit dizzy, still impressed by the vertiginous descent they had just experienced. They were now on one of the most protected floors of NASA, where only authorized personnel could enter. Still stunned, they headed towards the entrance of the building. Tommy felt a knot in his stomach when he realized that he was about to enter the most secretive part of the space agency, the place where he would spend the rest of the day working on amazing projects. Tommy was impressed by the technology and facilities he saw as he walked down the hallway. He saw laboratories, control rooms, and various people working on projects he couldn't even imagine. He wondered what they were doing and how important their projects were. They continued walking until they reached the NASA Space Exploration Team's conference room. Tommy was impressed by the large conference table and the large screen monitors on the wall. Ian sat at the head of the table while Lucy and Tommy sat next to him. Ian began the meeting presentation, showing the report from the last mission and discussing the areas that needed further research and development. Tommy was impressed with the amount of work and effort that the team had put into the last mission and the amount of information they had brought back. Tommy attentively followed Ian's presentation, but something deeply bothered him. He vividly remembered the sabotage problem they had faced on the last mission, and felt a twinge of anger thinking about how Bill had damaged crucial equipment devices, and even kidnapped one of their team members, causing a series of problems and delays. Raising his hand, Tommy interrupted Ian and suggested that the team consider the possibility of using a more robust security system for the equipment. He explained that security was essential for the mission's success and that the team needed to be protected to avoid similar problems in the future. Ian agreed and thanked Tommy for his contribution, recognizing the importance of security for the mission. Tommy felt relieved to see that his concerns were taken seriously, but still wondered how they could ensure the team's total security. He knew he needed to think more about it and discuss with his colleagues. As he sat down, he felt Lucy's hand touch his and smiled, knowing he had her support on his journey. The meeting ended and Tommy stood up, feeling excited and inspired. He knew there was a lot of work to be done, but he also knew he was part of a team that was helping humanity achieve great accomplishments. He felt like he was part of something bigger than himself, and that was an incredible feeling. Tommy and his friends left the conference room and returned to the bright corridor. Tommy and Lucy sat down at a table in the cafeteria to discuss the team's projects and Tommy's suggestion to strengthen security. Lucy looked at Tommy with admiration and said,
"Tommy, you are truly a natural leader. Your attention to detail and concern for everyone's safety is inspiring."
Lucy said admiringly. Tommy smiled, feeling grateful for the compliment. Lucy was the chief engineer of the team and worked alongside Tommy and Ian on many projects. He admired her intelligence and technical ability, but also appreciated how she made him feel. He always felt comfortable around her, as if he could be himself without judgment. As they talked, Tommy found himself looking deeply into Lucy's eyes, feeling a connection that went beyond friendship and work partnership. He knew she was the right person for him, but he hadn't found the courage to confess his feelings yet. Lucy noticed Tommy's gaze and smiled, briefly looking away. She also felt a special connection with him and wondered if he felt the same way. Meanwhile, the team kept working on the NASA equipment security project, becoming more united and committed to the success of their missions. Tommy and Lucy knew there was a lot of work to be done, but they were ready to face any challenge together, not only as co-workers, but also as life partners. The day of the mission to explore Mars had finally arrived. Tommy, Lucy, and Ian were very nervous, but also excited and determined to successfully carry out the task entrusted to them. They knew they were about to make history, exploring a planet that had always fascinated humanity and representing the hope that one day man could colonize it. Tommy was fascinated with the images of the red planet that he had seen during training, even if they were just simulations. The idea of being on Mars, exploring its surface, and discovering new horizons was something he couldn't put into words. He imagined what it would be like to walk in an environment completely different from what he was used to see the sunrise and sunset on a planet far from Earth. As they prepared for the mission inside the rocket cabin, Tommy, Lucy, and Ian knew that every detail had to be calculated meticulously to ensure that everything happened as safely and efficiently as possible. Ian, as the leader of the maintenance team, had the responsibility of ensuring that all procedures were being followed correctly, while Lucy was in charge of monitoring the communication systems and instruments that allowed them to measure atmospheric conditions and cosmic radiation. Tommy, on the other hand, was responsible for monitoring the spacecraft's navigation, using his knowledge of mathematics and physics to calculate the best route to safely reach Mars and return, always advised by Ian and Lucy's reports. His experience on the previous mission made him the most prepared member of the team, but he knew he needed to focus on the present moment to ensure everything was correct. Before the trip, Tommy's mother and father visited him along with his uncles, Ian's parents. They talked to the team, encouraging them and giving them words of wisdom and comfort. Lucy's mother also appeared in the cabin, hugging her daughter and asking Tommy to bring her back from the mission safe and sound. Tommy's heart raced as he entered the spacecraft cabin. It was incredible to be there, about to embark on a mission to explore a distant planet. He took his seat in the central chair, with Ian to his right and Lucy to his left. They were wearing spacesuits to protect them from the hostile environment of space. Tommy shuddered as they closed the cabin doors, and the team began to prepare for the countdown.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, lift.
Tommy felt a jolt as the spacecraft took off, pushing him back into his seat. He looked out the window and saw smoke rising from the ground as the rocket gained altitude. The sound of the engines echoed in the cabin as they broke through the atmosphere and entered deep space. Tommy felt a mix of fear and excitement as the spacecraft sped away from Earth at an incredible speed. They had been informed that the journey to Mars would take several weeks and that they would have to deal with extreme conditions such as the absence of gravity and temperature variations. The team would need to be prepared to face these challenges and work together to ensure the mission's success.
We'll be experiencing some turbulence.
Tommy and his team spent the first few days on board the spacecraft adjusting to living conditions in space. They were in a confined environment, surrounded by complex equipment, and had to deal with the lack of gravity. Each had specific tasks to perform, and they worked together to ensure that everything was functioning correctly. Tommy was impressed with Ian and Lucy's experience in performing their tasks. He knew they could rely on each other in any emergency. After several days of travel, the team realized that the lack of gravity was starting to affect them. They moved through space with difficulty, trying to adapt to the weightlessness. Tommy felt a little nauseous, but soon found out that it was normal and that he would get used to the environment soon. Despite the difficulties, Tommy and his team were confident in their ability to complete the mission and return home safely. They knew they were making history, exploring a planet that has always been a subject of fascination and ambition for humanity. Tommy dreamed of walking on the Martian surface, discovering new forms of life and new possibilities for space exploration. But there was still a lot of work to be done before they reached Mars. They would have to deal with unforeseen situations and keep the spacecraft functioning properly throughout the entire journey. The first few days were exhausting, with the team trying to adapt to life in a confined space and dealing with small technical problems that arose along the way. But despite the fatigue, everyone was excited about the idea of being a little closer to Mars every day that passed. They knew that there were still many challenges ahead, but they were determined to get there and make the mission happen. At one point, the spacecraft passed through an area with a lot of cosmic dust, which caused a series of technical problems. Ian worked tirelessly to try to solve the problem, while Lucy and Tommy tried to keep the team calm and healthy. It was a tense moment.
We'll be experiencing some turbulence.
As the team was on their way to Mars, a cosmic dust storm hit the spacecraft, shaking it violently. Everyone on board was concerned about the safety of the ship, but after a few minutes, the storm finally passed. Unfortunately, as soon as the storm dissipated, the team realized that the malfunction had caused serious damage to the external landing equipment. Tommy and Ian worked hard to try to solve the problem, but the situation seemed increasingly desperate. That was when Lucy offered to go to the outside of the aircraft to try to repair the equipment. Everyone was impressed by her courage, but also concerned about the possibility of a new storm approaching. Tommy remembered Lucy's mother's words and was afraid that something could go wrong and the love of his life could be lost in the vastness of space. Lucy prepared to leave the spacecraft, putting on her spacesuit and turning on the oxygen equipment. Carefully, she stepped out of the ship, facing her fear that the dust storm would reappear. She held onto the damaged equipment, working with the tools she had brought to try to repair it. Meanwhile, the team inside the spacecraft anxiously waited, monitoring the situation through the screens. The tension was palpable, and everyone knew that a new storm could put Lucy's life at risk. But the brave crew member continued to work tirelessly, not letting the danger discourage her. Tommy was waiting anxiously in the depressurization area, gripping the safety handle tightly as he watched the door slowly open. He was nervous and worried about what could happen outside, but he knew Lucy was a brave and experienced astronaut. While he waited, he mentally reviewed all his rescue options in case something went wrong. Finally, the door opened completely, and Tommy saw Lucy slowly coming out, with a relieved smile on her face. She looked exhausted, but she was okay. Tommy ran to her and hugged her tightly, feeling his heart beating fast in his chest. It was the first time he hugged Lucy like this, so intensely, and the feeling was overwhelming. Lucy appeared a bit surprised by the strength of Tommy's embrace, but she didn't resist and returned it with an even tighter grip. She felt a huge relief as she entered the spacecraft again, having completed the important task of repairing the external landing equipment. She knew she had risked her life out there, but the success of the mission was worth it. Tommy couldn't help a silly smile as he continued to hug Lucy. He felt so grateful and relieved that she had come back safely. Suddenly, he realized he had been holding onto Lucy for too long and stepped back a little, feeling embarrassed. Lucy, however, seemed reluctant to let go of him. She was still holding onto Tommy's arm, looking directly into his eyes. Tommy realized there was something different about Lucy's gaze, as if she wanted to tell him something.
Tommy, I wanted to thank you.
She finally said, with a low and emotional voice.
You've always been so brave and confident on this mission. And I want you to know that I'll never forget what you did for me.
Tommy smiled shyly. He had never received such a sincere and affectionate compliment from Lucy before. It made him feel even more connected to her.
I was just doing my job,
He replied modestly.
but I'm glad to have helped.
Lucy shook her head, still holding onto Tommy's arm.
No. Tommy, you did more than your job. You helped me complete this mission, and I'll never forget it. Never.
Tommy didn't know what to say. He felt his heart racing again, and a strange and intense feeling ran through his whole body. He realized he was falling in love with Lucy for real. But he wasn't sure if the feeling was mutual. He didn't want to ruin the friendship they had. Suddenly, Ian appeared in the decompression area, interrupting the intimate moment between Tommy and Lucy.
Hey friends, sorry to interrupt, but I think we can now go back to the cabin, okay?
But there was a new problem. The spacecraft would need to alter its course to avoid the approaching storm, which would delay the team's arrival on Mars by a few days. Despite everyone's frustration with the delay, the team knew that safety was paramount. Tommy praised Lucy's courage and thanked Ian for his tireless dedication in trying to solve the problem. The team moved forward, now with a new route, hoping that their mission on Mars would be successful. Everyone was more united than ever and knew they could count on each other to face any obstacles that arose in their way. Tommy and his team were about to accomplish the great goal of the mission, landing on Mars. But they knew it would be a difficult and risky task. After facing several difficulties throughout the journey, they finally arrived in the orbit of the red planet. They watched the surface of the planet through the spacecraft's window and were amazed by the view. However, as soon as the team prepared to begin the descent towards the Martian surface, the spacecraft's fuselage began to vibrate more than usual. Tommy and the other crew members immediately became concerned about the safety of the spacecraft. They knew that something was wrong. As Tommy took control of the spacecraft, he tried to maneuver it towards the surface of Mars. He knew that any mistake could be fatal for the crew and the mission as a whole. The tension inside the cabin was palpable, and Tommy focused as much as possible to execute the maneuver with precision. As the spacecraft slowly descended towards the surface of Mars, Tommy tried to control it as best he could while the other crew members supported him. They were concerned about everyone's safety, but they knew that Tommy was an experienced and reliable pilot. The descent was even more challenging than they had imagined. The spacecraft was shaking violently, and Tommy had to use all his skills to keep control. The crew was tense, but they trusted Tommy. They knew he would do his best to land safely. The spacecraft finally landed on the surface of Mars after many tense minutes. Tommy and his team breathed a sigh of relief and hugged each other. They had done it. They had landed on Mars. It was then that the team realized that the cosmic dust storm had caused more damage to the spacecraft than they had realized. The structure was compromised, and that was why the spacecraft was shaking so much. Tommy and his team decided they needed to try a manual landing since the automatic systems would not work correctly. They knew, however, that there was still a lot of work to be done. The spacecraft's fuselage needed to be repaired and the route would have to be reevaluated. But for now, the team felt relieved and happy to have reached their final destination. Tommy and his fellow crew members were ready to explore Mars and uncover its secrets. But the landing wasn't as smooth as they had hoped. When the spacecraft finally landed on the ground, they felt a strong jolt, indicating that something had gone wrong. Tommy looked at Ian, who was as pale as a sheet.
What happened?
Tommy asked, his voice trembling.
I don't know.
Ian replied,
I think something went wrong with the brakes. We landed with a little more force than we should have.
Tommy sighed, feeling the tension leaving his body. They now had to focus on correcting the problem. He knew they couldn't waste time, as the team needed to start collecting data as soon as possible. Ian began checking the ship's systems, while Lucy and Tommy started preparing for their first walk on Martian soil. They put on their spacesuits and carefully checked all systems. Tommy could feel his heart beating hard in his chest. He could hardly believe he was about to take his first steps on another planet. Finally, the team was ready. They opened the door of the spacecraft and stepped out, setting foot on Martian soil for the first time. Tommy could feel the granular texture under his feet. He looked around, observing the rocks and the arid landscape. It was like nothing he had ever seen before. Lucy began setting up the data collection equipment while Tommy and Ian walked around the terrain. They took pictures and collected soil samples. Tommy could feel the excitement growing inside him. They were making history. But, as always, not everything went as planned. While collecting soil samples, they heard a strange noise coming from the spacecraft. They ran to check and found out that a metal plate had come loose from the fuselage during the landing. This explained the jolt they felt when they landed. The team led by Ian immediately started working to fix the problem while Lucy monitored the situation. They knew they needed to fix the spacecraft before they could even think about going back home. Tommy felt the anxiety growing inside of him. They were millions of kilometers away from Earth, on a hostile planet, and the spacecraft was damaged. Tommy and Lucy left the spacecraft in search of materials for collection. They walked through a rocky and rugged region, looking for pieces of materials that could be useful for their research. Suddenly, something caught Lucy's attention.
Tommy, look at this!
She said, pointing to a nearby crater. Tommy approached and looked inside the crater. It was a strange formation, shaped like a large footprint. The two looked at each other, perplexed. Could there be life on Mars? Or was it just a coincidence?
We need to understand this better,
said Tommy. They decided to descend to the bottom of the crater to investigate more closely. Tommy went first, carefully descending the slippery rocks. When he reached the bottom, he began to examine the formation more closely. Suddenly, he was pulled down with force, as if something had sucked him into a hole. Lucy heard a scream of terror coming from the bottom of the crater and ran to see what had happened. She saw Tommy disappear into the hole and panicked.
Oh no! Tommy! Tommy! Can you hear me? Are you hurt? Tommy! Tommy!
She shouted on the suit radio. There was no response. She tried several times, but Tommy seemed to have disappeared from the map. She took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. Tommy was an experienced astronaut. He knew what he was doing. She needed to believe that he was okay and that he would be able to get out of the hole. Meanwhile, Tommy struggled to free himself from the air pocket that held him. He tried to move upwards, but the force of the air current was too strong. He began kicking his legs and flailing his arms, trying to create an air current that would lift him out of the hole, but it was no use. He remained stuck, struggling against the current of air that held him. He began to run out of air and feel dizzy. He was about to give up when he felt the ground disappear beneath his feet and fell into a lake. Tommy sank into the dark, cold water, struggling to resurface. When he finally emerged, he realized he was in an underground cave. He activated the emergency signal on his suit and waited for a response from Lucy. Meanwhile, Lucy tried to find a way to reach him. She knew that time was crucial, as she didn't know how long Tommy could survive in that hostile environment. She looked around, searching for an exit. Lucy finally heard Tommy's voice echoing on her radio, and her heart filled with relief. He reported that he was safe, but urgently needed her help. Tommy asked her to follow the emergency beacon to find him, and that there was a surprising discovery to be made. Despite being relieved, Lucy knew that time was crucial and immediately began searching for a way to reach him as quickly as possible. She remained calm and focused on finding a solution to the situation. When she finally found him, she saw that he was okay, and together they decided to collect as much material as they could to take back to the ship. Then they heard a strange roar coming from the depths of the cave. It was a low sound, but it seemed to come from something big and powerful. Lucy froze, feeling fear taking over her body. She immediately grabbed Tommy's hand. They needed to get out of there as fast as possible. Shouting through the radio, she asked Ian to turn on the ship's engines and prepare for immediate takeoff. On the other end of the line, Ian had also heard the roar and was equally scared.
Without hesitation, he started up the engines and prepared the ship for takeoff as quickly as possible. The tension was palpable as Tommy and Lucy ran towards the ship, their suits weighing them down with each step. They could hardly believe what they had just discovered. Water on Mars! This could change everything that was known about the possibility of life on the Red Planet. But at the moment, all that mattered was escaping from the imminent danger.
Lucy and Tommy ran as fast as they could, afraid to look back and see what was coming after them. They knew it was some strange creature, something they had never seen before. But they didn't have time to think about details. They had to reach the ship as quickly as possible. Finally, they managed to board the ship with Ian waiting for them. He activated the takeoff system and the ship began to move away from the surface of Mars. They drifted away, looking back with relief as the creature roared in the distance. They had survived one of the greatest threats the universe could offer. But this discovery of water on Mars would change everything. They had found something that could change humanity's understanding of life in the universe. Tommy opened his eyes and blinked a few times, trying to understand what was going on. He saw a greenish glow passing through the room and realized it was the TV off the air. The boy sat on the couch, still drowsy, and looked at the clock on the wall. It was already late at night, and he didn't know what was going on. It was then that he heard his father's voice calling him to go to bed. Tommy rubbed his eyes and got up, following his father to the room he shared with his sister Liz. He noticed the blue checkered blanket that his father would use to cover him, the lamp with the weak yellowish light almost off. Liz was sound asleep in her bed and Tommy could hear his sister's peaceful breathing. His father put him in bed and gave him a kiss on the forehead before whispering, "Sweet dreams, my son." At dawn, Tommy woke up excited to go to school. He searched with wide eyes for Lucy, and finally found her. Tommy told Lucy about his adventure the night before, in which he was an astronaut on a mission to explore Mars, and that Lucy was a part of the whole adventure. Lucy was impressed by Tommy's story and asked if he thought it could be possible. Tommy replied with exaggerated confidence,
Of course, Lucy. I'll be the first astronaut to step on Mars.
Tommy thought with a smile on his face. On his way back home at the end of the class, Tommy passed by an electronics store and saw a color TV on. A reporter appeared on the screen with images of Saturn in the background. He was fascinated by the images of the rings and the planet, and from that moment on, he knew what his next adventure would be: Tommy, the Dreaming Astronaut, and the Rings of Saturn. Thank you for watching our video. It was made with a lot of love. Don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications. We'll see you soon. Bye.